The Treaty of Peace and Friendship of 1904 between Chile and Bolivia was signed in Santiago de Chile on October 20, 1904, in order to delineate the boundary through 96 specified points between Cerro Zapaleri and Cerro Chipe and to regulate the relations between the two countries 20 years after the end of the War of the Pacific. The Bolivia-Chile boundary has a length of about 861 kilometers and is demarcated by pillars located in the Andes. Most of the boundary consists of straight line segments between high mountain peaks. For the Argentina-Bolivia-Chile tripoint of Cerro Zapaleri, it extends northward through more than 5 degrees of latitude to the Peru-Bolivia-Chile tripoint at 17 degrees 29 minutes 55.0 seconds south latitude and 69 degrees 28 minutes 28.8 seconds west longitude. Historical background. When Bolivia became independent from Spain on August 6, 1825, it took possession of the territories that corresponded to its colonial administration in accordance with the Uti Possidetis Juris of 1810. Bolivia claimed the maritime territory westward from the Andes to the Pacific Ocean between the Rio Salado on the south and the Rio Lo on the north, which included part of the Atacama Desert. In 1842, Chile made claims to the desert area following the discovery and exploitation of nitrate deposits. With negotiations extending over a period of several decades, a decision was reached finally between Bolivia and Chile in a treaty dated August 10, 1866. Article 1 of the Treaty of 1866 stated that the line of demarcation of boundaries between Chile and Bolivia in the desert shall henceforth be the parallel of latitude 24 degrees south. On December 5, 1872, a subsequent treaty confirmed the 24th parallel as the boundary between the two states. In accordance with various other treaties, Bolivia was given an equal share of revenues from guano deposits located in Chilean territory between the 24th and 25th parallels, and Chile had the same concession in Bolivian territory between the 24th and 23rd parallels, which area included the port of Antofagasta. In 1872, the government of Bolivia granted a concession to a British firm to develop the nitrate deposits in Bolivian territory for a period of 15 years. The following year, the secret Treaty of Alliance between Peru and Bolivia of 1873, called Defensive by the Signer, was signed at Lima in order to guarantee the independence, sovereignty, and integrity of the respective territories, though this treaty was kept secret and not communicated to Chile. Therefore, Chile interprets this pact as a secret alliance against them. In 1878, Bolivia placed a minimum tax on the production of the nitrate firm. In the intervening time, the concession had been transferred to a Chilean company, making the leveling of the tax a violation of the Treaty of 1866, in which Bolivia had agreed not to increase taxes on the industry without the approval of Chile. Chile asked Peru for a proclamation of neutrality, but as the latter did not respond, Chile declared war on both Peru and Bolivia on April 5, 1879, precipitating the so-called War of the Pacific. The Treaty of Ancon ended the conflict between Peru and Chile on October 20, 1883, and a truce was signed by Bolivia and Chile at Valparaiso in April 4, 1884. In accordance with the terms of the truce, Chile was to administer Bolivian territory from the 23rd parallel northward to the Rio Lo, thus depriving Bolivia of the northern part of the province of Antofagasta and a Pacific littoral. The eastern boundary of the territory was given as a series of straight-line segments extending northward between stated points from Cerro Zapaleri, through the two-thirds of the northeastern slope of Cerro Lacancibur, Cerro Cabana, most southerly bayhead of Salada Ascotan, Vulcanoihu and Vulcantua, and then by the boundary between the former Peruvian province of Tarapacá and Bolivia. In 1889, a railroad constructed inland from Antofagasta reached Uyuni on the Bolivian plateau. On May 18, 1895, a treaty signed by Chile and Bolivia confirmed the latter's loss of the territory between the 23rd parallel and the Rio Low. A second treaty also was signed on the 18th by the two states that promised to transfer Tacna and Arica to Bolivia should Chile obtain them, or if not, the Caleta de Vitor, a small port south of Arica. On October 20, 1904, a peace treaty between Chile and Bolivia delimited the boundary through 96 specified points between Cerro Zapaleri and Cerro Chipe. Provision was made in the treaty for demarcation, and boundary pillars were erected shortly thereafter. Chilean sovereignty was recognized by Bolivia over the territory from the ocean to the existing Argentine boundary between the 23rd and 24th parallels. Chile also recognized the right of Bolivia in perpetuity to commercial transit through its territory and ports, to be regulated by special agreements. The Salas-Pinilla Protocol of 1907 made two modifications of the 1904 boundary, although ratifications of the protocol were not exchanged until 31 years later. A change was made between Cerro Chipapa and Vulcanolca in favor of Chile in order to keep the Coliguasi Railroad, which connected with the Antofagasta-Uyuni Railroad, entirely within Chilean territory. In return, a second change transferred a small parcel of Chilean territory to Bolivia between Cerro de Patalani and Alto de Panamtela. In 1913, a railroad was completed between Arica and La Paz, which gave Bolivia access to the Pacific Ocean by means of a second railroad. In accordance with the terms of the Treaty of Ancon, Peru ceded unconditionally to Chile the littoral Tarapacá province, bounded north by the Rio Cameronese, south by the Rio Low, east by Bolivia, and west by the Pacific Ocean. The provinces of Tacna and Arica, bounded north by the Rio Sama from its source in the mountains adjoining Bolivia to the sea, south by the Rio Cameronese, east by Bolivia and west by the ocean, were to be administered by Chile for a 10-year period, followed by a plebiscite to determine whether these provinces would remain permanently under Chilean administration or if they would continue to be part of Peruvian territory. Efforts to reach an agreement on the terms of a plebiscite were unsuccessful, and Chile remained in possession of Tacna and Arica after the expiration of the 10-year period stipulated in the Treaty of Ancon. In a treaty signed at Lima on June 3, 1929, Article 2 delimited the international boundary dividing the disputed territory of Tacna and Arica between Peru and Chile. A complementary protocol signed on the same day stated in Article 1 that neither government might without previous agreement with the other cede to any third state or law any part of the territory which, in accordance with the treaty, remained under the respective sovereignties. In Article 2 of the protocol, port facilities granted to Peru under Article 5 of the treaty should consist of free transit to Peruvian territory and from such across Chilean territory. The placing of pillars marking the boundary was completed the following year, and a demarcation protocol was signed at Lima on August 5, 1930. In 1939, Chile announced a plan to divert the waters of the Rio Lauca westward through a canal and tunnel into the Quebrada Izapa for purposes of irrigation in the Vale de Izapa and hydroelectric power generation. Within 6 miles of the international boundary, Lago Cotacotani is the source of the Rio Lauca, which flows successively westward, southward, and eastward for about 50 miles in Chilean territory before entering Bolivia, where it ultimately reaches Lago Coipasa. Construction on the project was not started until 1948, and water diversion began 14 years later from a dam located about 16 miles southwest of Lago Cotacotani. In 1962, Bolivia threatened to take the matter of water diversion before the Organization of American States, which organization ultimately requested the governments of Bolivia and Chile to resort to one of the means of Pacific settlement of disputes provided for in the Inter-American System. Geographic setting. The Bolivia-Chile boundary extends along the spectacular heights of the Cordillera Occidental of the Andes, from 13,000 feet at the Peru tripoint. It connects with numerous snow-capped peaks exceeding 18,000 feet in elevation to the Argentina tripoint Cerro Zapaleri at 18,530 feet. Several peaks are above 19,000 feet, such as Cerro Zapaleri with an elevation of 19,587 feet. In general, mountain passes are high and not easily accessible, with some over 14,000 feet in elevation. Barren rocky slopes, limited areas of short grasses, and scattered mountain shrubs are typical along the boundary. Near the boundary, salas or salt plains are common, such as the Salada Coipasa in Bolivia and the Salada Ascotan in Chile. Because of great differences in the elevation and exposure of landform features in the Andes, climatic conditions range broadly along the boundary. Characteristic of the high elevations, mean annual temperatures are relatively low and precipitation tends to be greater on the windward side than on the leeward side of the mountains. The temperatures and precipitation of enclosed valleys and plateau areas contrast greatly with the exposed peaks. Most of the high peaks are snow-capped throughout the year. In general, the area is sparsely populated and few roads cross the boundary. Small towns serve mining companies, transportation maintenance stations, and scattered people engaged in pastoralism or limited cultivation. The principal roads crossing the boundary parallel the Arequipa and Antofagasta Uyuni railroads. A number of tracks and trails are in use locally along the boundary. SRTM topographic maps of the boundary Chile-Bolivia. Boundary alignment. The treaty delimited the boundary from south to north through 96 specific points indicated in the text by numbers in parentheses. In accordance with the Treaty of 1904, the boundary between Cerro Zapaleri, the Argentina tripoint, and Cerro Chipe is as follows. For the highest peak of Cerro Zapaleri, in a straight line to the highest point of the ridge going toward the south of the Cerros Tagayux in the approximate latitude of 22 degrees 54. From here another straight line to the Portezuelo del Cajon, and following the divide of that ridge which runs north by the northern slope of Cerro Jurix, through the nominated point located at 2/3 of elevation of the northeastern slope of Volcan La Concebur in the latitude of 22 degrees 49 minutes 41 seconds and longitude of 67 degrees 52 minutes 35 seconds. Cerro Zapaleri, Curicaca, and Volcan Putana at Jorgensen. From this point follows by one of the spurs in the direction of the Cerro del Pajonal, and in a straight line to the southern peak of the Cerros de Tocopuri, from where it follows again by the divide of the Cordon del Panazo, and Cerros de Tatio. It follows always to the north of the divide of the Cordon del Linzor and of the Cerros de Silaguala, from whose northern peak it goes by a spur to the Cerrito de Silala, and then in a straight line to the Cerro Inaquilaria Cajon. For this point it goes in a straight line to the peak that seems to be in the center of the group of the Cerros del Inca Barranca, and then, along the divide following northward by the ridge of the Cerro de Escotana Jardin. For the peak of this mountain it goes in a straight line to the peak of Cerro Araral, and by another straight line to the peak of Vulcanologue. From here in a straight line to the highest peak of Cerro Chipe. The Boliviano-Chilean Protocol of 1907 modified the boundary of 1904 between Cerro Chipe and Vulcanolca and transferred a small parcel of Bolivian territory to Chile. Between Cerro Chipe and Vulcanolca, the boundary shall be a straight line from Cerro Chipe, as marked, to the northern crest of Cerro Parima, leaving inside Chilean territory a space of not less than 1 kilometer between the easternmost point of the Colaguasi Railroad and the frontier. From Cerro Parima it shall continue along the crest which unites Cerro Parima with Vulcanolca. The boundary between Vulcanolca and Cerro de Patalani is delimited by the Treaty of 1904. For this volcano it follows by the ridge of the Cerros del Milunu, of Laguna, Vulcaniraputuncu, Bofedal and Chelo, and from a high point of mountains, it arrives at Miluri and then Wilcani. From here it goes to the Cerro Kaiti and follows by the divide to Cerro Napa. For the peak of this mountain it goes in a straight line to a point situated 10 kilometers to the south of the east peak of Cerro Huaya, from where it goes in a straight line to the height mentioned, doubling back again to the east and following by a ridge of the Cerros Laguna, Corregidor, and Huayaputuncu to the easternmost stones of Sililica, following along a ridge that goes northwest to the peak of Cerro Piga. For this mountain, it goes in a straight line to the highest peak of Tres Cerritos and follows in a straight line to Cerro Chalacolo and to the narrowest part of the fields of Sacaya, opposite to Villacolo. From Sacaya the boundary goes in a straight line to the stones of Cueva Colorada and Santal, where it follows to the northwest by the Cerros Iraputuncu and Patalani, a second modification of the 1904 boundary made by the Boliviano-Chilean Protocol of 1907 between Cerro de Patalani and Alto de Panamtela, transferred a small piece of Chilean territory to Bolivia between Cerro Patalani and Panamtaya. The frontier shall be a straight line from Cerro Patalani to the crest of Cerro Ayarpa Pueblo, and from there in a straight line to Cerro Ayarpa. From there it shall follow the divide to the highest point of Cerros Silehua and shall double in the north in order to follow the Cerros de Tarini divide to the Apachita de Oje, and from the divide to Cerro Armasaya. For this point it shall be a straight line to Apachita Tirajala and from there a straight line to the Alto de Panamtaya as marked. The boundary between Alto de Panamtela and the Peru tripoint is delimited by the Treaty of 1904. From the height of Panamtela it goes in a straight line to Tola Apachita, half the distance between Chipe and Rinconada, and from this point in a straight line to the Portezuelo Wire. Next it passes by the peaks of the Cerros Lacataya and Salatral. It returns to the north going in a straight line to the Cerrito Tapacolo in the Salar de Coipaza, and in another straight line to the marker of Qualaga, from which it follows in straight lines to the Cerro Prieto to the north of the field of Pisiga, Cerrito Toldo, markers of Sicaya, Chapalixa, Cabre, Tres Cruces, Jamituma, Quimsacta and Chinchayani, and cutting across the Rio Tidu Santos it goes by the landmarks of Payacalo and Caruano to Cerro Capitan. It then follows northward by the divide of the ridge of the Cerros Lascaya and Quilhuiri, and from the summit at this point it goes in a straight line to the Cerro Pagintaca, To the north of this last point, Bolivia and Chile agree to fix the following boundary. From the Cerro Puquintica it goes northward by the ridge toward Macaya, crossing in this place the Rio Lauca and then following in a straight line to the Cerro Zapaleri. It continues northward by the divide to the Portezuelo de Japu, the peak of Quimasachata, Portezuelo Tambo Quimado, the Cerros de Quizicachini, Portezuelo Huicolo, peaks of the Cerros de Payachata, Cerro Larincarhua, to the Portezuelo Casiri. For this point it goes to the Cerros de Condoriri that separate the waters of the Rio Sajama and Rio Chuta from those of the Rio Cacena or Cosapilla, and continues by the ridge between those hills and goes to the Cerro Cabiri, passing by the Portezuelo Chuta. From Cerro Cabiri, it descends to the narrows of the Rio Cacena or Rio Caspraia above the post house which also bears the last name. It will then follow the course of the Rio Cacena or Rio Cosapilla to the outlet in the meadows of the Estancia, from where it goes in a straight line to the market of Isviri. From here it goes in a straight line. Present situation. Bolivia continues to have aspirations for a territorial outlet to the Pacific Ocean. Chile has granted Bolivia duty-free use of the ports of Arica and Antofagasta and of the railroads connecting them. An agreement has not been reached by the two states relative to the diversion of water from the Rio Lauca by Chile. There seems to be no dispute with respect to the alignment of the Bolivia-Chile boundary. Diplomatic relations between Bolivia and Chile have been broken since April 1962, with a shorter period of diplomatic relations in 1975 during the Pinochet Banzer negotiations.